No discussion about vintage space age ephemera could possibly be complete without talking about this stuff. TANG. In this episode, we'll offer up a serving of background information on TANG, dispel some rumors about the product, and even share a vintage TANG artifact from my collection and tell a little story that's tinged with a bit of sophomoric humor that makes this artifact so super cool. Ready to take a look? Away we go. Hello collectors and space fans, and Happy New Year. I'm Jim Frangione, and welcome back to another installment of Taking Up Space, the place where space history lives and where every artifact tells a story, where we seek to preserve vintage artifacts, reveal their history, and hopefully inspire some of you in the next generation of space explorers to take on interests relating to science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. If you're as passionate as I am about spaceflight or the preservation of space age history, be sure to click on the subscribe button and notification bell down below so that you don't miss out on a single episode. Today we're going to highlight a vintage artifact that, by its very nature, conjures up images of space travel in the early days of America's space program for a whole generation of people. I'm talking about TANG, a General Mills product that didn't initially sell all that well, but once it flew in space became virtually synonymous with the very idea of the astronauts and NASA's early space missions. So much so that many folks think it was developed for NASA specifically for space travel. Ordinarily, one would probably look at this artifact I'm about to share with you as an antique knickknack or a novelty from the 1960s. But its presentation and the astronaut signature that it bears takes this ordinary artifact to a whole new strata of extraordinarily cool. Like the drink itself, it's pure sugar and it's an awful lot of fun. And among the many fine items in my collection, it seems to be the one thing that draws the most attention, commentary, and smiles. I don't know, it just seems to connect with people. So without further ado, let's take a look just over my right shoulder for something hanging on the wall behind me. What I have here today is a vintage jar of TANG, minus its contents of course. It's framed in a shadow box along with a vintage ad for the product that came out of a 1969 issue of Life magazine. The folks at my local frame shop did an absolutely magnificent job in suspending the jar with fishing line that's barely noticeable just under the rim of the lid and around the lower edge of the glass jar to give it that floating zero-G effect in the frame. You'll also notice that the label on the jar is signed by none other than Charlie Duke of Apollo 16. We'll get to the significance of that in a moment. But first, a little history of TANG itself. TANG is an American drink mix brand that was formulated by General Foods Corporation food scientist William A. Mitchell in 1957. It didn't hit the shelves until 1959. And as I alluded to earlier, sales of TANG were initially poor. That is, until this guy came along. Once NASA used it on John Glenn's Mercury flight in February of 1962 and on subsequent Gemini missions, it has been closely associated with the American space program. So closely that it's created this misconception that TANG was actually invented for the space program. That's how well crafted Madison Avenue's campaign ads were in their day. Just look at some of these vintage ads and their vibrant art. Compelling stuff that embedded its way into the consciousness of a generation. I guess that's why this collectible, of all the collected artifacts in my collection, resonates so much with so many people when they see it. It's an old friend. It was always there. Although, as we headed towards the space shuttle era and what would ultimately become the International Space Station, as these two ads from the early 1970s reveal, their notion of what lay just a couple of decades ahead in the future didn't exactly hold up perfectly. With this early concept of the space shuttle being a fully reusable system and the space station crewed, in the words of this ad, by 12 men. With the ISS being crewed and commanded by women these days, I guess the future actually turned out better than they ever would have imagined. Still, you gotta love the craftsmanship that went into these old print ads. Now on to the story behind the autograph on this vintage TANG jar and its significance. As I mentioned earlier, it's signed by astronaut Charlie Duke, Apollo 16's lunar module pilot. He was one half of a rather notorious conversation on the moon that was inadvertently transmitted back to Earth. In April of 1972, Charlie and John Young were on the surface of the moon when TANG was behind one of the more infamous hot mic episodes of the Apollo program, where the astronauts didn't realize their conversation was being heard the world over. After Apollo 15 astronauts experienced arrhythmias or irregular heartbeats while exploring the moon at Hadley Rill due to reduced potassium levels, the beloved rehydratable orange drink was infused with potassium to avoid any such problems in the future. But that decision ended up creating another kind of problem. Let's just say that the astronauts got a little gassy. As you can hear in this audio clip, John Young was all too clear in expressing his displeasure. For the sake of the younger folks in this audience, a couple of the commander's profanities have been edited out, but you'll get the idea. Take a listen.
I got the parts again. I got them again, Charlie. I don't know what gives them to me. I think it's acid stomach. I really do. I mean, I haven't eaten this much citrus fruit in 20 years. And I'll tell you one thing. In another 12 days, I ain't never eating any more.
Orion, Houston. Yes, sir. Okay, John, you where you have my hot mic. How long we had that?
So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed the story revealed by something as simple as this old vintage jar of Tang. And I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about its history, its connection to the space program, and well, one of the more sophomorically humorous episodes encountered on mankind's pioneering expeditions to the moon. As I've often said, Apollo, and indeed the entire space program, was and is a human endeavor. Beyond all of the technical wizardry and the astronaut heroics that got us to the moon and back, the astronauts were and are people. And nothing makes you realize that our heroes are human more than the knowledge that they fart, just like the rest of us. And as this story reveals, whether it's a road trip with some high school friends or college buddies, or a trip to the moon, it's not just the destination that's memorable. It's all the stuff that happens along the way that makes the memories and becomes a part of the journey's history. And that's it for today, folks. A special shout out to my goddaughter Emma for the really cool shirt that I'm wearing today. Be sure to check out our description down below for links to some vintage Tang commercials, as well as a link to Steve Hankow's Farthest Reaches site if you're interested in getting a signed Tang jar of your own. I think he may have a couple of them left. And thanks a million for tuning in today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please give it a thumbs up down below and feel free to let me know your thoughts by dropping me an email at jim.takenupspace@gmail.com. Until next time, collectors and space fans, keep your head held high and keep your eyes on the stars. And take it easy on the Tang.